Former Justice Department Special Counsel Jack Smith is sitting for a closed-door deposition with House Republicans this hour. House Judiciary Committee members digging into his investigations into President Trump. Smith arrived on Capitol Hill moments ago, as you see here, and this deposition is part of an ongoing investigation into criminal inquiries of President Trump during the Biden administration. Smith, as you'll remember, led the investigations into Mr. Trump's efforts to overturn his 2020 presidential election and the classified documents at his Mar-a-Lago estate in Palm Beach, Florida. CBS News Department of Justice reporter Jake Rosen joins us now from our D.C. bureau with more on this. Really fascinating, Jake, to know this is happening behind closed doors with lawmakers right now. What questions do we expect Jack Smith to answer, considering all of his cases were moot since Mr. Trump became president once again?
Well, Smith's representatives and legal team have said that he's open to answering any.
All right, so imagine this. You're sitting in Congress, the same Capitol building that was violently attacked on January 6th, 2021. The same halls where rioters smashed windows, assaulted police officers, and tried to stop the certification of the election. And now you're reading testimony from former special counsel Jack Smith saying that the attack does not happen without Donald Trump. That Trump was the most culpable and most responsible person in the criminal scheme to overturn the 2020 election, that the evidence was strong enough to convict Trump at trial, that Trump should be looking at serious prison time for what he did. And then you realize none of it matters because Trump won the 2024 election. He's president again, and DOJ policy says you can't prosecute a sitting president. So all of that evidence, all of Smith's work, all of the proof that Trump caused January 6th, it's legally useless. Trump is never going to face a jury. He's never going to be convicted, and he's never going to see the inside of a prison cell, at least not for January 6th. And if you're a member of Congress who lived through that attack, who feared for your life that day, who watched democracy nearly collapse, that's got to be maddening, because you're being told that the person most responsible for the attack on your workplace is walking free, not because he's innocent, but because he won an election.
Questions that these House Republicans have. They actually offered earlier this year, Errol, to go in front of both the House and Senate publicly for everyone in America to see the person who brought these high-profile charges, as you noted, have since been dismissed, but at least be held accountable in the public eye and to defend his work. There have been so many misconceptions and, frankly, Errol, attempts to rewrite the work of Jack Smith by the Trump administration and Republicans in Congress. Jack Smith and his legal team are trying to do that today. However, they point out in numerous statements over the last couple of weeks that they're worried that this potential closed-door testimony would result in cherry-picked quotes potentially being pulled from this conversation. In addition to that, just not getting the exact amount of transparency that they want in going forward. However, we're likely to hear pushing from House Republicans on what Jack Smith knew and signed off on ahead of the Mar-a-Lago raid, which was related to the classified documents probe, at the same time as Jack Smith's ongoing work for years about the January 6th attack at the Capitol and the...
So Congress is screaming, the public is screaming, because the gap between what the evidence shows Trump did and what the legal system is actually doing about it is enormous. And it feels like justice is on fire, like the same Capitol that burned on January 6th is watching accountability burn too. Let me be clear about what Jack Smith said, because this isn't vague, this isn't speculation. Smith told Congress under oath that the January 6th attack does not happen without Trump. Not that Trump played a role, not that Trump contributed, that the attack doesn't happen without him. Smith called Trump the most culpable and most responsible person in the scheme to overturn the election, and Smith said his team had enough admissible evidence to convict Trump on multiple felonies if the case had gone to trial. That's a prosecutor saying, we had him. We could have proven it beyond a reasonable doubt. We could have gotten a conviction. And convictions on conspiracy to defraud the United States and obstruction of an official proceeding carry prison time, serious prison time. So Smith is essentially saying, based on the evidence, Trump should be in prison for January 6th, but he's not, because DOJ policy forced Smith to drop the cases once Trump became president, and Supreme Court immunity doctrine makes future prosecution nearly impossible. So Trump walks free, and Congress has to live with that reality. Now, Smith's testimony and reports are public now. People can read them. They can see the evidence Smith gathered. They can see witness statements from Trump's own advisors and supporters, like a former Trump elector who admitted they were trying to overthrow the government and knew it was illegal. That's the kind of evidence Smith had. Direct admissions from people involved that what they were doing was a criminal conspiracy. And Smith believed he could use that evidence to convict Trump. But he never got the chance because Trump delayed. He appealed. He dragged out the proceedings. things, and then he won the election. And once he won, DOJ policy protected him. So Trump's strategy worked. Delay long enough to win an election, then use presidential immunity to make the cases go away. And that's exactly what happened. The federal January 6th case was dismissed, not because Trump was innocent, not because the evidence was weak, but because the legal system couldn't proceed against a sitting president. And now Congress is furious because they're looking at a detailed record that says Trump caused the attack on their workplace, that Trump should be convicted and imprisoned. But they're also looking at a legal system that says, sorry, that's not going to happen. And the frustration is boiling over because what's the point of having laws if the most powerful person in the country can break them and face no consequences? What's the point of evidence if it can't be used? What's the point of prosecutors building cases if DOJ policy just makes them disappear? And here's what makes it even worse. Trump isn't just walking free. He's using the Justice Department aggressively to go after his enemies. He's threatening judges. He's opening criminal investigations into the Fed chair. He's weaponizing the same system that's protecting him from accountability. So Congress is watching Trump cause an attack on the Capitol, avoid prosecution through delay and immunity, and then turn around and use DOJ as a weapon against his critics. And they're powerless to stop it because Trump is president. And presidential power shields him from consequences. So, yeah, Congress is screaming, the public is screaming because the evidence says Trump should be prison bound, but the legal system says he's untouchable, and that gap is tearing the country apart. Let's break it down. Okay, so let's dig into what Jack Smith actually said and why it's so damning for Trump. Because Smith's testimony and reports are incredibly detailed. They lay out the evidence, they explain the legal theories, and they make it clear that Smith believed he could convict Trump if the case had gone to trial. First, the big picture. Smith told Congress that the January 6th attack does not happen without Trump. That's the headline. That's the finding that matters most, because Smith isn't saying Trump played a role or contributed to the attack. He's saying the attack wouldn't have happened at all if Trump hadn't done what he did. That's direct causation, and it makes Trump criminally responsible. Smith also called Trump the most culpable and most responsible person in the scheme to overturn the 2020 election. Not one of many people involved, the most culpable, the person who bears the most responsibility. And Smith said his team had enough admissible evidence to obtain and sustain a conviction at trial. That's prosecutor speak for we had a strong case. We could prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. A jury would convict. So Smith is putting it on the record. Trump caused January 6th. Trump should be convicted. And if not for DOJ policy and Trump's election, that's exactly what would have happened. Now let's talk about the evidence Smith gathered, because it's not just Smith's opinion. It's based on years of investigation and mountains of evidence. Smith interviewed hundreds of witnesses. He gathered documents and communications. He built a timeline of Trump's actions before, during, and after January 6th, and he identified specific criminal conduct. The indictment Smith filed before the case was dismissed laid out multiple charges. Conspiracy to defraud the United States, conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding, obstruction of and attempt to obstruct an official proceeding, conspiracy against rights. These are serious federal crimes, and each one carries prison time. Now, the conspiracy to defraud charge relates to Trump's scheme to overturn the election through fraud and deceit. Smith documented how Trump pressured state officials to change vote totals, how Trump's team created fake elector slates in swing states, how Trump tried to get the Justice Department to declare the election corrupt, and how Trump pressured Vice President Mike Pence to refuse to certify the results. All of that was part of a coordinated scheme to defraud the United States and overturn a legitimate election. The obstruction charges relate to Trump's efforts to stop Congress from certifying the election on January 6th. Smith documented how Trump knew the electoral count was happening, how he knew his supporters were violent and planning to go to the Capitol, how he incited them with his speech, telling them to fight like hell, and how he then refused to stop them for hours while they attacked the Capitol. All of that is obstruction of an official proceeding. Trump was trying to prevent Congress from doing its constitutional duty, and he used violence to do it. And Smith had evidence from Trump's own advisors and supporters, people who were in the room with Trump, people who heard him speak, people who participated in the scheme, and some of them admitted what they were doing was illegal, like the Trump elector who said they were trying to overthrow the government and knew it was illegal. That's a confession. That's direct evidence of criminal intent. And Smith would have used that at trial to show Trump knew what he was doing was wrong and did it anyway. Smith also had evidence of Trump's state of mind on January 6th itself. Testimony from White House officials about what Trump was doing while the attack unfolded, how he was watching TV and seeing the violence, how his advisors were begging him to call off the mob, and how he refused for hours. That shows Trump's intent. He wanted the attack to succeed. He wanted Congress to be stopped, and he was willing to let violence happen to achieve that goal. So, the evidence Smith gathered was extensive and damning, and Smith believed it was enough to convict. But he never got to present it to a jury because Trump delayed the proceedings. He filed motion after motion, he appealed every ruling, and he dragged things out until he won the election. And once Trump became president again, DOJ policy forced Smith to drop the case because the Justice Department has this long-standing rule that you can't indict or prosecute a sitting president. It's not a law. It's not in the Constitution. It's just internal guidance, but it's treated as binding. So Smith had no choice. He had to dismiss the charges, and Trump walked away. Now, the dismissal was without prejudice. That means the charges could theoretically be brought again after Trump leaves office. But that's incredibly unlikely because by the time Trump leaves office, January 6th will be 8 years in the past. Evidence will be stale. Witnesses will be harder to find, and public interest might have moved on. So even though the dismissal was technically without prejudice, the practical reality is that Trump is never going to face a January 6th trial. The window for accountability has closed. And then there's the Supreme Court immunity ruling, because even if prosecutors wanted to charge Trump after he leaves office, immunity doctrine might protect him. The Supreme Court held that presidents have broad immunity from prosecution for official acts, and Trump could argue that everything he did on January 6th was part of his official duties as president. He was trying to ensure election integrity. He was exercising his free speech rights. He was acting in his capacity as president. And if courts accept that argument, Trump would be immune. He couldn't be prosecuted at all. So between DOJ policy protecting sitting presidents and Supreme Court immunity protecting official acts, Trump is essentially untouchable. The legal system has erected so many barriers that prosecution is nearly impossible. And that's what's driving Congress and the public crazy, because they're being told Trump caused January 6th, that he should be convicted and imprisoned, but they're also being told the legal system can't actually do anything about it, and the frustration is boiling over. Now let's talk about what Congress is doing with this information, because Smith's testimony and reports are now public, members of Congress have read them, and they're furious. Democrats are using Smith's findings to argue that Trump should never have been allowed to run for president again, that someone who caused an attack on the Capitol shouldn't be eligible for office. But Republicans are dismissing Smith's work as political. They're saying if the evidence was really that strong, Trump would be in prison. The fact that he's not proves it was all a witch hunt. So, you've got this massive divide. Democrats see Smith's testimony as proof Trump is guilty and should be imprisoned. Republicans see it as proof the whole thing was political persecution, and there's no bridging that gap. Because at this point, views on January 6 are tribal. They're not based on evidence, they're based on which side you're on. But here's what we actually know. A jury would have looked at the evidence Smith gathered. They would have heard testimony from witnesses. They would have seen documents and communications, and they would have decided whether Trump was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And Smith believed they would have convicted. That's not a political opinion. That's a professional judgment from a career prosecutor who spent years building the case. But we'll never know for sure because the case never went to trial. Trump's delay strategy worked, and now he's protected by his office. So the question of whether Trump is actually guilty in a legal sense is going to remain unanswered. And that's maddening for people who want accountability. Now let's talk about what a conviction would have meant, because Smith's charges carried serious prison time. Conspiracy to defraud the United States can carry up to 5 years. Obstruction of an official proceeding can carry up to 20 years. So if Trump had been convicted on multiple counts, he could have been looking at decades in prison. Now, judges have discretion in sentencing, and it's unlikely Trump would have gotten the maximum. But even a fraction of the maximum would have meant serious time. We're talking years, not months. And that would have been unprecedented. A former president going to prison for trying to overturn an election and causing an attack on the Capitol. That would have been a defining moment in American history, but it's not going to happen because the legal system has protected Trump. And that protection is permanent, at least for the January 6th